go along. So, as I say, thank you. Welcome to today's session. We're really looking forward to welcoming you to today's session on behalf of our wonderful Pro Parents Committee, the newest arm of our EDI committee. So our EDI committee that we're very proud of has 6 parts. Pro women, pro parents, LGBTQ+, social mobility, disability, mental health and neurodiversity, and race, ethnicity and religious belief. And as I say, parents is our newest one. We've now been, however, the group has now been together probably coming up to a year, and the Pro Parents Committee have done some really great, made some really great progress since I think it's probably around Easter time last year we started, and we've looked at homeschooling and parents getting back to work after COVID, and that adjustment and what that's been like for parents as children go back to school and they go back to work, and also what it's like for the children. And today our session is about keeping children safe online, and it's going to be hosted by Helen Westerman, who's the head of local campaigns at the NSPCC. We're delighted that to be working in partnership with the NSPCC. So before we start, just a couple of points of housekeeping. I am recording this session, as I say, just for anyone who can't make it today. However, we will just be purely recording Helen's presentation content. When we open up for discussion and questions, I will stop recording. So everything that you want to discuss today will be kept private and confidential to this session. It won't go anywhere else. It won't be recorded anywhere. Please, as I say, keep your microphones on mute because we do get that kind of reverberation issue otherwise, but there'll be opportunities to come off mute and ask questions later. You're more than welcome to have your cameras on or off, whatever you're comfortable with. Following this, there will be a post-event email which will include our feedback form. It'd be really appreciated if you could take 2 minutes to fill this in. It really does help us and the committee to know what to do next and what's important to people. And it'll also include a bit more information kindly provided by the NSPCC. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Helen. Last thing to mention, of course, if you have any questions at all, please do just add them in the chat box and I will read them out at the end, or as I say, we'll invite you to come off mute. So yeah, without further ado, I'll hand you over to Helen.
Thank you, Sean. I'm really lovely to be here this morning. My name's Helen Westerman. As you mentioned, I'm head of local campaigns here at the NSPCC. And my team lead on delivering our online safety workshops. We've been doing this now for the past seven years. So really pleased to be with you this morning. By the time you've reached the end of this session, we hope that you've got a greater understanding of the risks and benefits of being online for children, some practical things that you can do to help keep your children or children that you know safe online, and a greater knowledge of some of the tools and resources that can help you. As we're not in the room today together, I'm happy to take questions at the end, and if you've got any burning issues, if you pop them in the chat, I'm sure that Sean will let me know as we go through the session. I'm going to give you an introduction to keeping children safe online, and also cover in a bit of a whistle-stop tour some of the key concerns that that parents and carers have about their children being online, and these will include grooming, the impact of being online on children's mental health and well-being, our role as parents or carers, and what we do and how we're role modelling our good behaviour, and then a little bit about persuasive design, so how tech keeps us and our children and young people coming back and back and back. So when we're having those conversations about, can you get off your tech, can you stop playing that game, it's a meal time now, can you do some homework, we'll have a better understanding of how difficult that can be for children, but also us as adults, because the tech keeps us wanting to return. Some of the subjects that we will cover in this session are pretty emotive and pretty difficult, so please feel free to, if you need to take a break, go away, get a cup of tea, please do that, and I will be signposting to sources of help and support throughout the session. Okay, so I'm going to start by talking about children's use of technology. And as we know, throughout the pandemic, we saw greater numbers of children being on tech for longer periods of time and using tech independently earlier. So in terms of 3 to 4 year olds, we know that a quarter now have their own tablet and 15% are allowed to take their tablet to bed with them at night. Of 5 to 7 year olds, 14% have their own smartphone, nearly 60% have their own tablet. Of 8 to 11 year olds, 50% of this group now have their own smartphone and 44% have their own social media account or accounts. And please bear in mind that most social media is designed for children aged 13 plus, sorry. In terms of 12 to 15 year olds, we know that 99% are active on video sharing platforms and over 80% are playing games online. And by the time you're 16 plus, tech is often very firmly part of your everyday lives. So on the next slide, we're going to show a short video, and this is parents talking about some of their concerns about what their children may or may not be doing online and what they do to mitigate for some of those risks. And really, as parents and carers, it's really important to remember that you're not alone in the worries that you may have, and you may identify with some of what these parents are saying.
Helen, we don't seem to have sound on that.
Haven't.
No, we did in our test, of course we did.
Let me try again. Apologies. Let's see if we can do that again. Okay. We'll go back to the beginning, and let's hope we can. Just let me know if you can hear it, Sean.
No.
No?
No. Oh, what a shame. It really worked well before.
I don't know why that's... Yeah, that's strange, isn't it? I'll try one more time. Okay. Can we hear it?
No, it seems to have frozen a bit as well.
Okay, I'll move on. What I'll do, Sean, is I'll send the video afterwards so people can have a look.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so basically in that video, we were hearing from parents and carers talking about things that they were concerned about for their child. So it may be that they were concerned perhaps about unwanted contact. They were concerned about who might be influencing their child. They were concerned about the amount of time perhaps their child or young person was spending online, and who was influencing them. But we also know that there are loads of positives for children and young people about being online and how important it is in many children's lives. As we know, over the last 18 months, I don't think many of us could have managed without tech, and those of us with children at home, tech was really helpful for them in terms of homeschooling, keeping them linked up with friends and family, and also providing some entertainment when things were a little bit bleak. So it's really important that when we're talking to our children and young people, we're acknowledging the positives of them being online, presenting that balanced view, because if all we talk about is the risks, the negatives, the don'ts, the stop, the don't do that anymore, children and young people actually stop listening because we sound a little bit irrelevant to them. And we need to remember that for most children, most of the time, their online world is a relatively happy and safe one. So it's about showing an interest, finding out what they like to do online, maybe playing that game, looking at that YouTube channel, looking at that blogger that they're interested in, showing it a bit of interest, as you would do their day at school or their activities that they do outside of the home, because then they're much more likely to come to us if and when something goes wrong. We do know, however, that there are risks for being online. So, for example, a child might seek out or stumble across content that isn't suitable. They may experience unwanted contact from others. They may experience or see cyberbullying. And as part of our offer to parents and the communities in which we're working, we run a number of unknown safety sessions on particular topics, including bullying, that's cyberbullying. We also talk about gaming. We also talk about friendships and online dating. So, if from today's session you're interested in more specific information, we'd be happy to come back and talk about those things. So how do we manage the risks? We bracket them under 3 headings. So who they're talking to. As we know, there's loads of different ways that we can chat online, and young people as adults can speak to anyone at any time. Some of the key risks in relation to who they're talking to include grooming and cyberbullying. And I'm going to come on to talk about grooming in a little while. But obviously cyberbullying is bullying that takes place online and unfortunately can follow a child wherever they go. The 24/7 nature of this can be particularly relentless. In terms of what they're seeing, as adults, there's things that we don't want to see online or be exposed to. And a lot of the content isn't designed with children in mind. So the risk of our children seeing something inappropriate or harmful can be amplified. Also, innocent searches can lead to not so innocent results. So some children may go looking for inappropriate content, others may stumble across it or get sent it or shown it by a friend. And we know that children have access or are looking at pornography at a younger and younger age. A piece of research by the Children's Commissioner for England showed that by the age of 14, over 90% of children and young people had seen pornography online. But it's also important to notice that children get upset by different things at different times. So what might be okay for one child might not be okay for another child who's of a similar age. So, the impact of what children are seeing can vary from child to child. Also, what they're sharing. So children and young people really like to share what they're doing, their interests, their hobbies online. And the risk comes when this is oversharing. So things like sharing their username widely could put them at risk, as it could leave them contactable across various platforms, and sharing detailed information about their location, so their home, their schools, the clubs that they're involved in, means that they're able to be located offline as well as online. We know that some young people do share or receive sexual messages, images or videos, which is against the law. And it's worth reminding our children that when they share online, it's never fully private. So even in a one-to-one chat, things can be forwarded on, shared more widely. And so with this in mind, it's worth talking with your child about what they share, making sure that they're always talking appropriately with friends and others online, so that something that's shared in the here and now doesn't have negative repercussions for your child in the future. And we've certainly seen some examples of that with our politicians and people in the media spotlight, where they perhaps shared something when they're teenage and then it's come back to bite them when they've got a more high profile role, perhaps in public office. So with all of this in mind, as parent or carer, it can feel pretty daunting to know how to respond. And if I was in the room with you today, I'd probably get us up now, moving around, going to either one end or the other of this continuum, or maybe even in the middle. So looking at the slide, where do you think you are on this scale? Are you kind of at the casual end? Are you more controlling, which is certainly me? And I desperately try and drag myself back into that middle bracket. There's absolutely no judgment. We all have different parenting styles. Some of us might already be really knowledgeable about the apps and games our children are using, be pros at setting up parental controls. Some of us might not be interested in tech very much at all and feel really on the back foot when it comes to knowing about what our children are doing, or perhaps how to keep them safe. Some parents may feel the need to be more in control of what their child is doing offline and online, while others might be much more casual and relaxed about it. Some parents at one end of the spectrum can feel like, well, that's not going to happen to my child, perhaps don't want to consider parental controls, or have had little or no conversations about online safety. Other parents might use monitoring apps to track their child's online lives. Some may not let their child use tech without supervision, but ideally by the end of this session, we hope you feel more confident and knowledgeable and equipped to have those regular conversations and know what to do if your child comes to you about something upsetting they've seen or been involved in online. Just like we have conversations with our children about how to keep safe offline, we need to do the same online. So treat it just like any other parenting task. We do know that there's risks at being at either end of this spectrum. So perhaps if we're a little bit too controlling, when our child starts to use tech independently, they may not have had help in terms of navigating how they judge what's real, what's not real, what to do if something upsets them. And likewise, if we're too casual, our child could have access to inappropriate or adult content at a much too younger age. So it's about trying to find that middle ground is really important. I want to touch on just a few subjects, and we can go into these in much more detail perhaps at another time, but I'm just going to highlight some of the issues that parents say they're concerned about with their children online. So what is grooming? So grooming is when an adult deliberately builds an emotional connection or trust with a child with the aim of engaging them in sexual behaviour or exploitation. And the relationship that the groomer builds with the child is not necessarily initially sexual, but they can also be an authority figure, they could be a supportive figure, a mentor in the child's life, and building that trust and connection first before anything else is muted. It can happen to any child anywhere, both online, offline, and there's many tactics that groomers use. They may start to establish that emotional connection with the child, and we certainly saw much more of that during the lockdown when children were spending more time online. We certainly saw an increase in adults with an unhealthy interest in children going online and trying to build those connections with children that perhaps feeling a bit more isolated, a bit more lonely, and in need of that connections. Contact can also come via the parent and carer, with someone perhaps flattering them online, dating sites, etc., with the primary aim of actually reaching that person's child or young person. So it's important to be aware of that. And in the past, when grooming used to take place kind of in face-to-face, it could take weeks, months, or even years for that groomer to gain the trust of the family and the child. Now, actually, that can happen much more quickly online, where an adult can send out multiple messages to different children across various platforms with the aim of getting that one pickup to start that conversation and start to build that trust. So how do we spot the signs that our child or young person may be experiencing this online? And you'll know your child or young person best, and this is not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the things that to be mindful of. Children may display behaviour that is not age appropriate, could be sexualised behaviour or language, or behaviour that's unusual for them. And it's important that we try to talk to our children to gauge what might be going on for them. Remember that children experiencing grooming may have a lot of complicated feelings about the person that's grooming them, so they may not recognise what is happening to them as abuse, and particularly if it's another person that's perhaps similar in age to that child or young person, perhaps it's an older teenager, they may feel that they're actually in a relationship with that person. So we have to tread really, really carefully as parents and carers, trying to not to make that child feel like it's their fault, like it's their responsible, but finding out what's really going on for them. Groomers often make a child feel special, and it's really important to bear this in mind. They can make the child feel that they're the only person who understands them, and this can be an incredibly powerful tool for control and manipulation. On this slide, we've got an example of a parent who contacted the NSPCC helpline with concerns that their child was being groomed. I'll just let you have a quick look at this. So Discord, she mentions Discord, that's a voice and text chat app for gamers, and it can be used to talk to other players whilst you're playing the game. And some of the tactics used could include changing your age or identity. And as I mentioned before, telling the child that they were the only person they could speak to. That they're going to do terrible things because they've created that emotional connection with the child, and they're the only ones that they can provide that help and support. So here we've got a child coming to their parent and saying that they've been they've made this friendship online, this person's having a really rough time, the person they're talking to really needs help and support, they've been role playing that they're in an actual relationship, and if they don't continue talking to them, they may harm themselves. And so this child fortunately came to their parent and said, this is going on, what do I do? I'm really concerned. So if your child does come to you in a similar situation, I think it's really important that we reassure them that they've done the right thing in coming to us and telling us about the situation. Acknowledge that we're not responsible for our friends' happiness, and that it can be really scary when we hear things like this. It can be really difficult to manage that. Talk about how it's left them feeling. So are they scared, or are they angry, and what support is in place for them? Because hearing this can be really challenging. So you might be chatting to your child as a parent, but they also might want to get additional support from Childline, and I'll come on to talk about that in a little while. Talking about getting the right help for their friend, and as a parent and carer, if your child comes to you with this, actually letting your child know that as a child they can't manage this situation themselves, so you'll need to pass their details on to professional organisations that actually can, and reassure them that they couldn't manage this on their own, and they've done the right thing by coming to you. And as a parent and carer, we have our NSPCC helpline available every day, so you could speak to us if you're wanting that place for help and support. And our number there at the bottom, 0808 800 5000. And this was an example of a child being groomed. This wasn't a child, actually. This was an adult pretending to be an 11-year-old. To gain that emotional connection and then build that trust with the child, with the aim of sexual exploitation. So as I mentioned, if your child has been contacted inappropriately, they've received sexual messages or requests via somebody that they don't know, really important that we listen carefully. Every bone in your body might be wanting to have an emotional reaction, to shout, be upset, but actually listen carefully, and trying to keep the emotion out of it is really, really important. Let them know that your child, it's not their fault, and that they've done the right thing by coming and telling you. Don't confront the alleged abuser, particularly if that's online. That's really unhelpful, and you may drive that person underground, but explain what you'll do next. So that could be contacting the police, it could be contacting the NSPCC helpline, it could be contacting the Internet Watch Foundation, and report it as soon as possible. And again, we've got some places here on this slide where you can go. One of the things that we have at the NSPCC through Childline is a service called Report Remove. And this is a service designed for young people to help them take down images, naked or semi-naked images that they may have shared online. And we work through Childline with the Internet Watch Foundation to take those images down from social media platforms. So after this session, really useful to go and perhaps look at the Report and Remove service, something to bear in mind should your child or young person ever let you know that they've shared something that they've later come to regret. I'm now going to move us on to talk about mental health and well-being, because we know that research into how social media can impact mental health is really limited still, and is often contradictory. And we know that young people, just as we do as adults, can benefit from a positive online life, but it also can have negative consequences for children's health and mental well-being. So, here's the list of positives: able to connect with like-minded people, having a voice about important issues, being socially connected for others. But there's a whole range of other potential negatives that children and young people experience about being online. So that comparison to other people's lives, is that real? That feeling that everyone's having a better time than that fear of missing out. You're all out having a lovely party and I'm at home perhaps doing my homework or whatever. It can really impact on children's mood, their self-esteem, their relationships and friendships. But we also hear from children that it can be quite difficult switching off. So that fear of, I don't want to be the first one to leave that group chat, can leave children being linked on tech for hours and hours, and sometimes even through the night, where we've heard from parents that children have had devices under their pillow just so that they can, keep up with the messages or be part of that chat. And also children can feel judged or ridiculed for what they post, or not even posting anything at all. Filters, we know, are a really popular way to change the way a photo or video looks online, and can be used across a range of different apps. And we know that some filters can be used for fun, so you'll be familiar probably with filters on Snapchat or Instagram. They can really lead to unrealistic comparisons, which can affect children of all ages and genders. And there was a Power of Image report done by the UK Safer Internet Centre back in 2017. And, you know, I'm sure if they did the same survey of children now, these figures would be even higher. But 45% of teenagers said they'd used a filter in the last year to make themselves look better. And 13% said they did that all of the time. 2/3 of respondents said they changed or edited a photo before sharing it, for example, using a filter or using apps like FaceSwap or Facetune. 1/4 said they'd done that in the last day. So lots of children are feeling that pressure to look a certain way. And young people take on average 12 selfies before posting one online. And again, this survey was done back in 2017, so I'm sure the numbers would be even more significant now. And on average, young people then were saying that they needed to get at least 48 likes on a photo before they felt happy about that. And if they didn't get that, they would take it down. Over 1/3 of young people in this survey reported feeling sad about their appearance after seeing a particular image or video, and girls and older children were more likely to say this. And over 10% of teens had said they felt insecure after seeing an image of a friend, someone that they knew online, looking better than them. So this is affecting the way children feel about themselves. And as we know, it's not just faces that are filtered. Body image is also filtered, and as we can see there, we've got the filtered picture and then the real picture. And just important to remind young people that it's, you know, it's not a show reel, and that what people post online, particularly on social media, is probably the highlights of their life rather than that day to day, how it is really. So in terms of ways to support your child, I think it's really important that we talk to them about how they can take control of what they're following. So can you help them, you know, kind of clean up their feed? And if you don't know how to do that, we've got some great advice and tips on the NSPCC website. So we've got some online safety pages which can give you as parents advice and support on how to do that. And help them to manage the time and what they're doing online. So make sure that they have activities that they can do that's offline, and not just focusing on the likes as well. In terms of supporting our children with their mental health and wellbeing, we've got a couple of agencies there that can help, but we've also got some really great resources on the Childline website. So we've got a place called Calm Zone, which is where children and young people can go get advice about how to manage feeling stressed or feeling anxious, breathing exercises, yoga techniques, some fun games to play. And during the first week of the lockdown in March 2020, we had over 10,000 hits on Calm Zone by children and young people wanting to manage and get support for how they were feeling. So this next bit is around us as adults modelling our good behaviour for children, because children really learn by what we do, not just by what we say. And I'm going to talk a little bit about sharenting. So this is really where the habitual use of social media by parents to share images, videos, milestone moments of their children. And that can be really nice because we're sharing with friends and family that perhaps aren't on local, so keeping them in touch with what our children are doing, how they're growing up, you know, milestone events, etc., etc. But some children really aren't pleased with what their children and with what their parents are sharing online. And again, a study done at the back end of the last decade, Our Internet, Our Choice, a study done in 2019, said that children 30% didn't think it was a big deal. Of parents, 30% didn't think it was a big deal, and 26% actually thought others would enjoy it. And 20% of parents didn't think they needed to ask permission for their child or young person about sharing information online. We know that a child's digital footprint can sometimes be before a child's even born. So when parents are taking photos of baby scans, creating Instagram accounts for their children. But obviously the internet's a bit like glue, no guarantee that something's completely gone, even if we delete it, because people can screenshot it, etc. So, you know, think about our old photo albums that perhaps we get out when we go around and see grandparents, etc. No one sees them unless we're popping round for that cup of tea or coffee. But actually, if all of these photos of our children and young people are online for people to see, both now and in the future, that can make our young people feel pretty unhappy about that. So, you know, we've asked young people how it makes them feel when we do share something without their knowledge or permission. And a UK Safer Internet Centre study looked at the views of 8 to 17-year-olds to get their experience of what it felt like when their parents or carers shared something online without their knowledge. And it really interesting that 15% said that they didn't mind, but 44% said they felt really angry, and 46% said they felt anxious or not in control. So we're all about, at the NSPCC, talking to children about consent, letting them know that they're in control of what they post, their online lives. And actually, as parents, it's really important that we're modelling that good behaviour. So if we want to share something online about our child or young person, that we're asking permission, we're giving them the opportunity to say yes or no to that. So you remember, asking your child about sharing things is an important part of role modelling that really good online behaviour, especially whilst they're young, so that by the time they're teenagers and young adults, they're going to be really considerate sharers. And a really interesting stat, I think, is that on average, there's 1,500 photos of a UK child online by the time they're 5 years old. And I find that absolutely amazing. 1,500 photos of a child by the time they're 5 years old. So in terms of when we're sharing, ensuring that we review our privacy settings. So we're really only sharing with the friends and family that we want to, so that we're not broadcasting necessarily to the world, and asking our children and other parents before, particularly if we're going to share pictures of other people's children, we need to get permissions for that. And helping our children to manage their digital footprint. So remember, that post that they share now might come back to bite them in future years where they're applying for that college or university place. And in terms of us being good role models ourselves, you know, we might say to our children, can you get off the device? Can you not bring your phone to the dinner table or whatever? So we need to be modelling that good behaviour ourselves, showing our children that we can take tech-free breaks, maybe setting time limits, using wellbeing tools. It may be no tech after lights out in bedroom, or having some tech-free time prior to going to sleep. On the NSPCC website, we've got a family agreement template, which can be really useful if you're wanting to set some rules and boundaries for you as a family to follow in relation to your online use. And I'm now going to talk a little bit about how tech keeps us coming back to our devices. So we all check our phones throughout the day, don't we? Whether it's to look at the news or browse social media, perhaps check our messages, research something. But how long on average do we think we check our phones on average? So is it sort of every 5 to 10 minutes? Is it every 25 to 30 minutes? It's actually a study conducted by Ofcom in 2018 found that we check or use our smartphones on average every 12 minutes. And we know that that's even more frequent for teenagers. So we are really in touch with our tech and using it all of the time. But mobile phones and online technologies are designed to keep us connected, engaged through what's called persuasive design, keeping us wanting to go back for more and continuing to use the apps and games. So if you thought you could just scroll through and reach the bottom of your social feed, that won't happen thanks to infinite scrolling. And if you're bored of scrolling, then you can always pull to refresh for more content. And there's no point in leaving the app whilst your friend is typing. And if you've managed to leave, then here's a notification to bring you back. And that notification is red deliberately, so you can't ignore it. And whilst you're back on the app, then there's some more suggested content for you. And if that comes to an end, then the next one is lined up and will autoplay. And how can we forget the rewards that we get for just clicking on that app every day? So persuasive design uses insights from psychology to make products more engaging. It's used extensively in social media apps to make sure that their users spend as much time as possible on their sites. But other apps use it as well, including games, video platforms, news apps, etc. And it uses information from what we research, click on, like and comment on across platforms to provide adverts, more content to keep us engaged, and it will recommend apps for us to use and keep us going back for more. And think back to how often we go on our phones every day and consider how many of those were because of these features. So doing this hopefully makes it easy to see why children and us as adults can end up spending a lot of time online and keep us being drawn back to our devices. But also one of the biggest draws can also be wanting to be part of what everyone else is doing online. So how do we take control? Well, we can choose what we're notified about. So meaning we might want to look at our phone quite as much. And we can also set app limits, which can help us to manage the amount of time you or your child spend online, which can ensure that they only spend time on specific apps or that perhaps support their well-being or their learning. We can use wellbeing apps and settings to support our mental health while we're still using our social media. We might want to use the do not disturb or night mode, and that can prevent our phone lighting up or notifying us when we've got people texting or calling us, meaning for less distractions. We can add people to our favourites, so if there's people that you want to be able to contact, i.e. children or grandparents, etc. But it's not just the amount of time we spend online, but also what we're doing. So as parents, we can get really bogged down in terms of screen time. And I'm often asked, well, what's a safe amount of time for my child to be online? And really, there's not lots of research to date to support, really clear guidance on what is helpful and unhelpful in terms of screen time. But we do know that it's children can go online and very quickly escalate into a conversation which is perhaps risky or look at content which isn't appropriate, but also they could spend huge amounts of time online talking to friends and family, which has really positive well-being considerations. So it's not just what they're doing, but it's not just how long they're spending online, but it's also what they're doing. And encouraging your child to take regular breaks, but also understanding that if they're playing that game, how long does that game usually last? I mean, if it's a 45-minute game, asking them to get off after 30 minutes perhaps is unrealistic or unhelpful. So getting to know what your children are doing and then setting realistic time goals for them. So in terms of how we talk to our children, and one of the biggest things that we can do as parents and carers and to protect our children online is to have those open and regular conversations with our children about what they like to do online. We don't need to be experts. We don't need to know all the apps. We don't need to know all of the tech and what it does, but we do need to show an interest in our children's online lives. If you don't know about some of the app sites and games your children are using and want to find out about the PEGI rating, the minimum age they should be using it at, there's a really great website called Common Sense Media that I would suggest you have a look at. But also on the NSPCC website, we've clustered together lots of different apps around social media, so you can see some tips and suggestions of how you might be able to monitor what your children are doing and really when's the right time for your children to start using particular apps and games. In terms of talking with your child, as I say, positives, taking that interest, playing that game of Clash and Clans or Fortnite and watching that YouTube film perhaps again and again will help you understand what your child is interested in and who's influencing them. Maybe setting some rules and boundaries for their use online, and that's much easier to do when your child is young and just starting to use tech. Much harder to claw that back when your child's sort of 14 and 15 and being used to having a fairly free rein in terms of how they use technology. As I mentioned before, if your child does come to you and talk about something that they've seen online that's worried or upset them, or indeed they've received a sexual or abusive message, listen carefully to them, reassure them that they've done the right thing in coming to you. It might be really, you might really want to take away the tech or ask them to not play that game anymore. And for children, that can feel like they're somehow at fault for what's happened to them. And we know then that they're much less likely to tell us next time if and when something goes wrong. So resist the urge to perhaps take away their device or ask them to stop playing a particular game, but look at how they might be able to report what's happened to them on a particular app, game or site. And again, our NSPCC website will give you tips and guidance on how to do that. Particularly if your child's older and they've received something online that's worried or upset them, ask them what they'd like to happen next. So, for example, if they've been bullied online, or it's not a case of just marching into school or messaging the parent of that child. Let your child try and be as in control as possible, talking to them about what the options are. And we know from children that they really appreciate that taking back some control when perhaps they felt very out of control in that particular situation. Explain what's going to happen next and then get support. So that could be through the NSPCC helpline, it could be through Childline, it might be through your child's school, or it could be through the Internet Watch Foundation. So there are a number of really practical things that we can do to help keep our children safe online. We've listed some things for younger and older children. So for younger children, they will need more supervision from a parent or carer, and we need to be much more proactive in exploring the apps and games they're using. Start talking with your child as soon as they start talking about tech, start using tech, talk about their online lives, agreeing those rules and boundaries, and review them as they get older. You can ask older children to show you what they like to do online and perhaps set up new apps together. And older children perhaps can agree some rules that parents can follow too. Remind them they can get support if anything is worrying them or upsetting them, so they might want to come to you, but you can also signpost them to Childline. On the Childline site, we have message boards which children can contact other young people, things that perhaps they're worried about or that they've experienced. Those message boards are moderated, so we've got adult moderators behind the scenes, but they're a great way of young people empowering other young people. And if you ever want to feel like to read some really good news stories, have a look at the Childline message boards, because they're really it's a great way to see how young people are supporting each other with some of the difficulties that they're facing both in the offline and the online world. There's also some really great videos on the Childline website on sensitive topics, including online safety, online bullying, grooming, etc. And many of them are done by famous bloggers or gamers, so they might resonate slightly better with your child or young person. And if I was delivering this face to face, we would probably have a chat now about some of the tips that you might have as parents or carers for things that work for you in terms of keeping your children safe. And we may want to share some of those when I stop sharing in a minute. But it's really helpful to share tips and suggestions with other parents and other family members. So as I mentioned, it might be helpful that you keep tech out of the bedroom after lights out, of devices getting charged downstairs. It could be that you have controls on your child's device that prevent them making in-app purchases without you approving these. So we've heard some real horror stories from parents being landed with huge bills when they didn't realise that their child had access to their credit, debit or PayPal account through the use of a shared device. If your child's in an online group or part of an organisation or club, it's worthwhile checking out whether they have separate groups for different age groups. So this minimises the risk of your child being exposed to content that's meant for older young people or adults. If your child's having online lessons, particularly one-to-one lessons, ideally you'd have those in the home open spaces such as a living room, and ideally not a bedroom. So as I mentioned before, some children and young people aren't comfortable with having pictures of themselves shared on social media by their parents, so it's definitely worth having conversations to agree what's okay or what's not okay. And if your child wants a new game, you might want to ensure that they can't download that without your permission, so you might want to use parental controls to manage that. And if your child's regularly playing games online with friends, particularly if they're young, it might be that you take it in turns with other parents to supervise, just have that listening ear, or you don't allow your child to use headsets so you can hear what's going on. So, just as you would if they were at each other's houses, you just take a listening ear, watchful eye on what's going on. So that's brought me to the end of the session. It has been a whistle-stop tour, so apologies if I've gabbled through some of that information. But as Sean said, I will be sending some links out to some of the resources that I've mentioned during the session. And we've got really great resources on the NSPCC website, but also on the Childline site. So I'm going to stop sharing now after I leave just our numbers up for a minute or so. And if there's any questions that you want to ask, please feel free to do that now.
Thank you very much, Helen. Please all feel free to either come off mute and ask a question, or you can jot it down in the chat and I'll relay it back. But yeah, please do ask any questions.
Did I see a question come up?
Yeah, sorry, that was from myself. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Great.
Sorry, that was just about so I've got a daughter that's 11 and one that's 8 now. My 11-year-old has just got a phone now, and I'm not the most techie person in the world, so you know that's where I can trying to get my head around it all and everything. And it's how do you set the parental controls on these things so that you can obviously see, you know, I don't really know what's the right thing to do in terms of what you can see them looking at and, you know, all that kind of thing.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. So you can set parental controls on your home Wi-Fi. You can set it on their devices. You can set it on, you know, obviously your smart TV, etc., etc. So if your child's got their first mobile phone, for example, you can set parental controls on their phone, and you can set restrictions on the phone. And we used to work in partnership with O2, the tech company, and they still offer a free service to any member of the public, regardless of who you're with. So you can go into store